What's up, everybody? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and for this video, we're doing our Week 3 preview show for 1B, 1C, and D in the Hudson Valley Football League. I want to thank you guys so much for joining. As always, if you like this kind of content, make sure to give that thumbs up and subscribe for future videos if you haven't already. But how this works, guys, if you're new, we're going to be talking about the games on schedule for each class. We're going to break down the top 5 games. And then we're going to pick all the games at the end. So we are going to go into each one. And even Mars has submitted his pick. So he makes his picks debut this year, even though he's not with me live. He was tired of watching me win all these games. So he wanted to put his games in to try to beat me out. And obviously always having a good time and having fun going back and forth talking football with me and Mars. Even with some of the fans that like to push back. That's all good stuff. So another great week of football. So let's start diving right into it. Looking at the schedule, guys, let's start with B. We have Rye at Pleasantville, Sleepy Hollow at Lakeland, Putnam Valley at Nanuet. We have Hen Hut at Nyack, Albertus Magnus at Briarcliff Hamilton Football Program. We have Ardsley at Byram Hills. We have Pearl River at Hastings, Edgemont at Croton Harmon, and Rhinebeck at Irvington. And on the C and D side, we have Woodlands at Valhalla, kind of a Hudson Valley Football League / C matchup. Tappan Zee at Westlake. We have Tuckahoe at Haldane in that big rivalry game. Dobbs Ferry at Bronxville. And then on the Hudson Valley Football League, a couple league matchups, Walter Panis at Spring Valley, Peekskill at Portchester, and Ramapo at Poughkeepsie. So those are the games on schedule. Now let's kind of dive into some of the top games. We'll go to the top 5 games for me. First one I want to talk about is a B matchup. Putnam Valley, who's 2-0 at Nanuet, who's 1-1. This is a big league game. Nanuet is 11-3 versus Putnam Valley over the last 14. They have won 3 straight with an average of margin of 102-3. So it's been a huge margin the last couple weeks. I have a feeling this one will be closer than you think. Let's start with Putnam Valley. They had a bye last week. I've been really impressed with the first 2 weeks of the year for them. Offensively, it starts with the run game. And Ricky Meister, he has 5 touchdowns this season, first 2 games. 5 touchdowns over the first 2 games, 150 yards the last game they played. And this offensive line has some size and strength to it, but it's going up against a very scrappy front, but that also has some bulk to it in Nanuet. So that's going to be one of the more interesting dynamics there. And last week, Nanuet had some blown coverage that is pretty uncharacteristic of them, but look for Putt Valley to try to take advantage of that and take some shots with one of their wide receivers in Glenn, who's a big-time playmaker, both running and receiving the ball for them. And now, defensively, the number one thing is going to be to stop the run. Nanuet has multiple rushers. They have like 4 or 5 guys who have over 25 yards or something like that running the football over 2 weeks. It's going to start with this defensive line and guys like Jashash. But they also have other, Tucker, Odin, Caden Glenn has been also very active on this defense. The reason why it's impressed me, Putt Valley moving the football, but also playing some strong defense, and it's going to be huge. Stopping the run is going to be absolutely vital. If they can get Nanuet into 2nd and 3rd and longs, then I think they'll be in, again, that's not what Nanuet wants to do. They want to be ahead of the chains, controlling the clock, get him in 2nd, 3rd, and long. Now Putt Valley can make some plays. Also keep an eye on a guy like Nick Rippo, has kick return touchdown this year. Special teams could be a big factor in this one, changing the game. Now moving to Nanuet, they lost 28-2 versus Rye. It was a very tough game for them last week. Offense really couldn't get going. Defensively, normally very stout, had a couple blown coverages that really cost them. And the turnovers were big. Losing the turnover battle is a huge factor. So I'm looking to see Nanuet respond after a tough game like that back at home. And again, they have multiple guys who can run the ball. The offensive line is not very huge, but they are a scrappy bunch. And again, they have some strength to them. So it was a struggle last week to stay ahead of the chains. Look for them to run the ball. They have multiple guys who can carry the rock. Their quarterback, Valise, struggled last week. He was 5 of 16 passing, but was also their leading rusher. So again, they definitely want to change that this coming time around. Put their quarterback in a better situation that he can make some plays and be more efficient. That's going to be the goal for Nanuet. Defensively, like Duffy had an INT last week. They had a safety. But again, they definitely want to shore up things on the defensive side of the ball with some, again, better execution coverage-wise. The big thing is stopping the run. So this defensive front 7 is going to be huge. I'm looking at a guy like Jack O'Sullivan to make some big plays on that defensive front, and these linebackers to be much more active this week. Don't let Putt Valley get ahead of the chains where the play action could really open things up. How do they defend against a guy like Glenn is going to be interesting in the slot. I'm interested to see what they do. So number one is to stop that rush attack. And how they match up versus Glenn, to me, is going to be huge. And I'm looking at this Nanuet offensive line. I mentioned not huge guys, but scrappy group. Look for them to respond. It was really tough running the ball last week. They want to run the ball this week versus this Putt Valley defensive front 7. All right, we're going to be going to the next game, guys, and this is a C matchup. Dobbs Ferry 1-0 at Bronxville, who's 1-1 league game, and overall, Dobbs Ferry has won this matchup, winning. I think they're 10-5 versus Bronxville. Last time they played was in 2021, where Bronxville won 48-7. So when I look at last week, Dobbs Ferry was on a bye week, but we know what they like to do offensively. They like to run the ball, and you're going to see a lot of, again, against the size of Bronxville, you're going to see a lot of the down blocking, pulling of the linemen, trying to create some angles. This offensive line is not huge for Dobbs Ferry, but there's another group that is stocky and strong, right? And they have, again, multiple guys who can run the football. You have McGoey at 91 yards and 3 touchdowns their last game. You have Guerrero, he had 47 yards rushing. You have Hartnett, who's been a big playmaker for them. They have multiple guys who are going to carry the ball for this offense, but it really starts on this offensive line and controlling the clock. And that's what opens up some things off of the play action passing game. But it all starts, they got to run the ball efficiently. You'll see multiple guys getting carries, and it's with this offensive line creating good angles for their backs. The defense, they allowed 0 points in week 1, and what they do a really good job is forcing turnovers. It's going to be huge because I think Bronxville, with their size, also wants to run the ball, and they have some playmakers in the back end like Drexel Lewis, who was an absolute ball hawk. He had an INT already this year. He led the league in INTs last year. You have Shamaski, who had an INT, but again, stopping Bronxville, putting them behind the chains, and allowing some of these big-time playmakers in the secondary is going to be a huge thing for Dobbs Ferry. When I look at Bronxville, last game, they lost a very close one to Tucko, and they started off really slow. They were down 21-0 at one point and scoring 19 points unanswered. They definitely have to start off faster this time around. And offensively, to me, with the size that they have, running the ball with Davis Patterson is definitely going to be a huge thing, because then the play action with Connor Kenny can definitely open up. They don't want to get behind the chains, because I mentioned about Dobbs Ferry, they have some ball hawks in the back end that force turnovers. They don't want to do that because, again, if they can't stop the run, they're not going to get a lot of possession. So to me, it's going to be so important for them to start off fast in this one. Defensively, they gave up some huge pass plays in the first half, playing against a very different offense this time around. But I'm looking at this defensive front seven, guys like McCon, McSherry, and these linebackers. They're going to have to, again, slowing down the run game is the top priorities, especially those off-tackle and sweep type of plays. And the secondary's got to be disciplined off of the play action, because that's how they can catch you. And I know they like running the ball. Everything looks the same. Then here comes play action out of that, and that's where the deep shots open up. The matchup, to me, the trenches. This is a huge trench battle. Look, the size of Bronxville versus the scrappy stoutness of Dobbs Ferry. I'm looking at the trench battle here is going to be the huge factor in this one. All right, guys, let's go to the next matchup. Another huge B matchup. Ardsley 2-0 at Byram Hills, who's 1-1. These two teams have gone back and forth as well. Ardsley's 5-3 overall in the last 8 matchups versus Byram Hills. Byram Hills won last year 28-21, and they have split the last 4 meetings 2-2. So gone back and forth. There's been a nice little rivalry developing between these two programs. Ardsley last game had a huge win versus Nyack on the road. And when I look at offensively, this is another group that could kind of beat you both ways. And their quarterback, Mike Rendy, had a huge game. He had 3 touchdowns last game, 2 rushing, 1 passing, also had a couple INTs. He was big on both sides of the ball and thrown to a big target like Chenard, who's a big player for them. But to me, the interesting thing for me, Byram Hill struggled last game stopping the run. So I'm looking at this offensive line who's got some veterans and some strength to them. Can they open up lanes for their running back and Ben Silverman? I think that's going to be an interesting scenario there. If they can run the ball efficiently, it'll open up things for Mike Rendy, even Mike Rendy running the football. So kind of using Silverman, Rendy running behind this offensive line could open things up. Defensively, last time they played against Nyack, they did give up some big plays, give up some big yards, but they forced turnovers, right? And that's what was a huge factor in this one. They forced a bunch of turnovers, 4 turnovers to be precise. We know about defensive lineman Speckman, who's very active, not a tall guy, but very disruptive. He had a sack. We look at defensive back Rendy, you had 2 INTs. If Byram Hills can run the ball and they're in the second and third and longs, at times their quarterback will force things, right? So he wants to be aggressive. He wants to attack down the field. Could open up some things for some potential sacks and some potential turnovers. So if they can, again, get Byram Hills behind the chains, it's going to be extremely important. And when I look at Byram Hills offensively, listen, it's not, they talk about, the quarterback making mistakes, and it is true, but they really struggled to run the ball. And so I'm looking at the offensive line to try to rebound against a disruptive defensive front is going to be very important. They got to get some balance. I know they like to throw the ball. Curso was still pretty efficient at 11 of 19, but couldn't generate any big plays in the passing game, and at times forcing things which lead to turnovers, right? So that's kind of the big thing. They want to be efficient. They want to attack downfield and be aggressive, but there's that fine line between being aggressive and being reckless, right? So to me, look for Weiler to try to get going, Curso to make some smarter decisions. I think you're going to see a nice rebound from this offense this upcoming week, but it's going to start at the offensive line. Defensively, again, they have to defend the run better. They gave up, over 200 yards rushing last game. So looking to see these linebackers, defensive linemen against Ardsley, who's definitely going to test the run game with guys like Silverman, who's a little bit different than Picard, right? He's still shifty, right? But he's not as big, but he'll make you miss, right? So he's really going to test your ability to tackle, to gang tackle, to swarm the football. So interested to see that. I'm looking to see this linebacker defensive line group. And then again with Rendy with his bounce attack, who's going to match up against a guy like Chenard, who's a big target for them. So those are some of the big factors that I'm looking at. And I'm looking at this Byron pass attack to respond pretty strong this week versus this Ardsley secondary. The Ardsley secondary made a couple of huge plays. We know that defensive line wants to get after the quarterback. They forced a bunch of turnovers last time. Can they do it again this week? All right, guys, 2 more games left. This next one I want to talk about, huge Class D matchup. Huge rivalry, Tuckahoe 2-0 at Haldane, who's 2-0. And they have a long history with each other, played each other plenty of times. Now Tuckahoe 23-4-1 in this matchup. Over the last 28 games, they have won 5 straight. And when you look at Tuckahoe, they had a massive win versus Bronxville. And on the offensive side of the ball, we got to give a lot of kudos to their quarterback. Let's start there. Jax Colachicho, 75% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns to 1 INT with 323 yards passing. He has been sensational for them, and I know that he was replacing a big-time quarterback. Coach was raving about him before the season, and so far, he has been very impressive. And again, they have a running game by committee. They have 4 running backs with over 40 yards rushing, but it's the efficiency of their quarterback that has been absolutely amazing for this offense. And they have a couple wide receivers who are big plays, and it starts with Connor Benke, who's their leading receiver with 11 receptions. He has 2 receiving touchdowns. Bryce has been a big playmaker for them with 3 receiving touchdowns, and Snyder with 2 receiving touchdowns as well. This offensive line has size and depth, and this offense can really hurt you throwing the football. And that's where, again, they like to show balance. Again, it's a committee running the ball, but make no mistake, that trio of wide receivers, they can make some big plays throwing the football with the efficiency of their quarterback. Defensively, on the other end, they have been sensational in forcing turnovers. They have forced 10 turnovers so far, 1 interception, 9 fumble recoveries. And it starts again with Benke. He's been the leader for them on both sides of the ball. To me, a big-time playmaker. But then the Bartolinis. Chris Bartolini, a leading tackler for them. You have Gardner, who's had 20 tackles, the junior for them. Anthony Bartolini has also been very disruptive. They got to stop the rush attack of guys like Giancinta, and then generating some pressure. They've also had 5 sacks in 2 games. So again, that's where the turnovers get generated. They're getting sacks. They're putting the offenses into big binds, forcing fumbles, and recovering them. That's the formula. Forcing turnovers, giving their offense extra possessions, and this offense has been efficient throwing the football. When I look at Haldane now, again, another very talented quarterback. Let's talk about quarterback Ryan Van Tassel. He has got 5 touchdowns so far this year, 2 passing, 3 rushing. This is a dual-threat quarterback for this offense. Michael Murray's made a receiving touchdown, and his kind of partner in crime, whether you want to call him Batman or call him Robin, whatever, they could switch off. But Evan Giancinta is a 2-way star for them. He's going to be so vital in this game on both sides of the ball. And also Williams, another guy, 72 yards rushing last game. But I'm looking at this offensive line. Guys like Rucker, guys like Hartman, Stickle. How are they going to go up against this tough defensive front of Tuckahoe? That's going to be the key factor here. They got to protect Ryan Van Tassel, try to open up some lanes for their running game. They have 2 tremendously important skill guys. How do they handle against the size and strength and depth of the Tuckahoe defensive front? Defensively, can they generate their pressure on Tuckahoe's quarterback? I mean, they have a trio of wide receivers that can make big plays all over the field, can give your team a lot of fits. What can help your secondary is defensively up front. generating that pressure. Now that bringing pressure is that front four beating the offensive line. It's going to be so important for this secondary to keep everything in front of them. Generating pressure is going to be so important for this defense. The matchup, Haldane's offensive line versus Tucko's D-line. This is the heavyweight fight right here. Tucko has been dynamic, forcing a lot of turnovers, creating a lot of sacks, 5 sacks in 2 games. This offensive line, if they want to pull the upset off, is going to have to protect their quarterback, Ryan Van Tassel. Finally, the game of the week. Class B matchup, Rye 2-1 at Pleasantville, who's 2-0. These two teams have not played each other since 2008. Rye is 4-0 all-time versus Pleasantville. It's been a lot of years since these two teams have played. And when you look at Rye, after the tough Week 0 game, they have won 2 straight in pretty dominant fashion. Now, they have also dealt with some injuries, guys like Swarak. You've seen some important players miss some time so far this season. So interested to see, again, what the situation is over at Rye. When you look at offensively, I love when they show that balanced attack with their ability to run the ball and throw the ball efficiently. And let's start with their quarterback in A.J. Miller. He is so important. There's so much put on his shoulders. He has over 500 yards passing so far this year, completing 67% of his passes, which is, again, another strong marker there to get over 60%. 4 touchdowns, 3 INTs, so Dua has a couple turnovers, and that's because he likes to attack down the field. So, again, I like the aggressiveness. Just have to be careful at times, being reckless instead of aggressive, right? So, but I do like, again, the last couple of weeks, you've seen this rush attack also develop, which has helped this offense be more balanced. And that's Luliano has 269 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns. Ramachandran also has He's also got a rushing touchdown and over 200 yards rushing. And I'm looking at this offensive line. How do they deal with the pressure that Pleasantville likes? They love to send their linebackers in A-gap stunts, bring some pressure off the edge. Pleasantville likes to use their speed. Their defense has been very dynamic over the last couple years, and this is another strong defensive unit. So this offensive line, guys like O'Byrne, how do they handle things protecting the quarterback? And A.J. Miller really has to be smart with the football here. You're not going to have a lot of time unless you go into max protection to defend against some of these blitzes, but then that's less receivers going out, right? So you got to be efficient with the football, know where you're going. Don't force things that aren't there. So you got to be able to protect the football, give yourself an opportunity. Now, running the ball will help, but Pleasantville has been very strong against the run. So interested to see how they get that balance because they have the weapons. I mean, Asia Avadi has been really the leading receiver for Rye. He's got 14 receptions. Stevens has 2 touchdown receptions. We know about Kesner, that big target at the tight end spot. Griffiths, big playmaker. Hess. I mean, they have multiple receivers. Really going to test the secondary of Pleasantville, but they have to protect the quarterback and give him time if they want to take advantage of it. Defensively, again, the big thing is bottling Picard, and so much easier said than actually done because he's one of the best players in this section. But again, there's got to be 2 kind of defenses. When he's in the backfield is one way, and when he's out as a wide receiver is another way. And so interested to see, but what I know is Rye likes to bring pressure, right? They also like to stunt their linebackers internally and bring pressure off the edge at times. So again, it's going to be, they're going to try to generate a lot of pressure on Pleasantville's quarterback. I would imagine you'll see a lot of stacked boxes when Picard's in the backfield. And a couple guys that have really stepped up for them. Saya has 16 tackles for them. Gonzalez, those have been the 2 big guys. He's got 15 tackles so far. We know about Kesner, who's an absolute load as an outside linebacker. Teams just try to run away from him. He's been big for them. Don't know, again, about Swarnak, who's so important up on the defensive line. Wilmarth is another guy who's made I thought he had a strong game last week versus Nanuet. Now, this defense, which is a bit surprising, over 3 games, 2 sacks so far. So they haven't gotten home rushing the passer as much as they probably wanted to so far. 3 turnovers as well. So this defense has usually been very primed at forcing turnovers, but what they've done a really good job is, again, a bend but don't break, right? And that, again, they like to be very aggressive. They want to force more turnovers, generate more negative plays. Interested to see how they do it this week. Now, when I look at Pleasantville now, last week wasn't their cleanest game, but what is always a good trend is good teams find a way to win even when they're not playing at their best. And that's what Pleasantville did. So they definitely deserve credit there. And offensively, it always starts with their guy, Daniel Picard, who, again, he has 296 yards rushing through 2 games at 5 touchdowns rushing, also 95 yards receiving and a receiving touchdown, also has a pick 6. I mean, I think Pleasantville has, 9 or 10 total touchdowns this year so far. 7 of them are from Daniel Picard, right? So, again, you're talking about 70% of the offensive production is from Daniel Picard, and that's going to be him in the backfield. And when he's in the backfield, they really like to run kind of these stretch plays, whether it's sweeps, design sweeps, or mid to outside zones, where you can stretch the defense horizontally and allow Daniel to make his cuts and make big-time plays. And now him being flexed out at wide receiver is another way, not just throwing him the ball, but creating, dictating coverages, right? So when he's out there, again, how teams are going to handle him it could be different per team, right? Now, last week, Pro River brought a lot of pressure. They wanted the quarterback to get the ball out of his hands out very quickly, and so that's going to be really important. How does Aiden Picard handle, again, you're going to see another team that likes to bring internal and external pressure. So where do you go with the football? When Daniel Picard's out at wide receiver in the backfield, it can open up man-to-man options versus other players. And a guy like Eric Coleman, who's a very fast wide receiver, could open up things for him. They did generate a big play last week to that. Aiden did a really good job of standing with pressure in his face and making a nice throw. And this offensive line, right, is a continuing growing offensive line. It's so important for Pleasantville. I mean, you see all these great plays by Daniel Picard, but you need an offensive line to make these plays. So continuing to see, again, it was mixed last week. Saw some good, saw some bad. How they continue to grow is going to be so important against a Rye defense that might be a little bit bigger than the offensive line. Defensively, and when I look at this defense as well, Pleasantville has been very strong defensively. They have generated 2 sacks so far this year over 2 games, but 4 turnovers, right? 2 INTs, 2 fumble recoveries. So they have generated a bunch of turnovers. Maybe not as much sacks as they would hope over the first 2, but again, forcing those turnovers is huge, and stopping the run has also been pretty big for Pleasantville so far this season. And they like to, again, generate a lot of pressure with their linebackers. Horrigan, Sadao, it really starts with them, but even McPhee, he's got 6 pressures so far. So they'd like, again, they're a very aggressive defense, a lot of internal stunting, especially through the A-gap with their linebackers, and then some of the external stunts with their outside linebackers. But I'm looking at this secondary. And when you look at guys like Hudzinski, McDermott, Mueller, Picard, against this plethora of talented skill guys, we know Pleasantville is going to be trying to stunt to generate pressure. Those guys are going to have times have to play man coverage, or play in some zone coverage and really be smart against these wide receivers. They cannot allow a lot of space because Rye can really kill you. They have some speed at the skill position that can really generate a lot of things, but Hudzinski is a big-time playmaker for them at the strong safety spot. Look for him to be very active in this one. And that matchup, I kind of just said, the Rye wide receivers versus Pleasantville secondary, it's going to be absolutely huge, this one. Interested to see how this turns out. And the player to watch is Daniel Picard. I mean, when you're playing these giant matchups, these game of the weeks, the best players come out and play, and I would imagine Daniel Picard is going to be a huge X factor. Rye has to do all it takes to try to force somebody else to make plays against them and bottle up Daniel as best they can. All right, guys, now we're going to go to our game picks. Mars has submitted his picks, so I will let you know what he picked, but let's dive all the way into them. We'll talk about all the games. Let's start at B. Sleepy Hollow 1-3 at Lakeland, who's 2-1. Big league game. Sleepy Hollow's offense has been struggling the last couple weeks. They got to get back to running the football. They've had 8 points combined the last 2 weeks. Defensively, having a tough time to slow down the run game. Now, Lakeland, big passing team. And Leonard has been fantastic. Over 300 yards of offense last week, 5 touchdowns thrown at the guys like Perry and Gallagher. The defense at times has also struggled against the run. So, interested to see which defense steps up this week. I'm going to go with Lakeland. I think Lakeland's offense has been pretty dynamic. Defensively, they have forced some turnovers. Look for Lakeland to win. Mars has also picked Lakeland. Let's talk about a C matchup. Woodlands 0-1 at Valhalla, who's 1-1. This is another league game. Woodland, the big thing is the ability to stop the run. Valhalla definitely likes to run the ball, which will open things up in their passing game. Preventing turnovers is going to be huge for Woodlands. They got to win the turnover battle, try to create some pressure on the outside, and not turn the ball over on the offensive side of the ball. But when you look at Valhalla, I really like the grit they showed against Westlake with the Foysette brothers running the ball and then O'Brien throwing. Defensively, they were really strong. I know Westlake had a lot of penalties, but I thought they were very strong running the ball. I think they'll be much better offensively this week. I'm going with Valhalla, and Mars has also chosen Valhalla as well. Let's talk about a Hudson Valley Football League game. Walter Panis 0-3 at Spring Valley, who is 2-0. This is a rematch of the Hudson Valley Football League Championship, and Walter Panis' offense has really struggled with Carlucci going down. 12 points and 6 points the last 2 weeks. They just haven't found that consistency. And when you look at Spring Valley, their defense has been very, very strong, right? So they have 12 points allowed the last 2 weeks, and they force a bunch of turnovers, which has helped their offense generate some big plays. They like to do condensed formations and run out on the edge and to the outside. I'm going to go with Spring Valley. They are at home. The defense is playing at a high level. They're forcing turnovers. I think Spring Valley wins this one. Mars has also picked Spring Valley. Let's go to the next game. This is a B matchup. Hen Hud 0-2 at Nyack, who's 1-1. When you look at Hen Hud, I thought they played Crown Harmon very tough. They're on a short week. But this is a jump up in speed, especially at the skill spot going up against Nyack. And when I look at Nyack, quarterback Tylen Blackwell-Williams, multiple touchdowns now in 2 straight games. Clearmount and Pierre have been a nice little dynamic duo running the football with this offensive front getting more and more experience. Look for a guy on defense like Booten to make some plays, and Massey, who have also been very active defensively. I'm going to go with Nyack in this one. At Nyack, tough place to play on the road. Nyack's going to win this one. Mars has also picked Nyack. This is a Hudson Valley Football League /C matchup. Tappan Zee 2-0 at Westlake, who's 1-0. When you look at Tappan Zee offensively, they've shown some nice mix, especially spreading the ball around. And they've scored 19 points and 34 points the last 2 games. Spread tech has been solid. Their quarterback has played pretty darn well these last couple weeks. Defensively, at times they've given up some big plays last week. Makes me a little bit nervous. When you look at Westlake, penalties were an absolute killer to them, but they still made plays and found a way to grind out a victory, and it's really on the back of that speedy defense. I think it comes to play again this week, and offensively, they make less mistakes with the guys like Pagan, Cali. I think Westlake is going to win this one at home, and Mars has picked Westlake as well. Here's a big Hudson Valley Football League matchup. Peekskill 1-1 at Portchester 1-1. One of the more interesting ones to me. And Peekskill, I know they gave me a lot of crap about not picking them last week, but give a lot of kudos to them. A huge win, scoring 30 points. Armani Brown, another big dynamic playmaker for them. I talked about before the season, but what has impressed me the most is their defense. They've allowed 13 points and 6 points. They took Spring Valley a couple weeks ago all the way to the brink. And when I look at Portchester, they have multiple guys who can make plays for you. Pauletti had a touchdown, Morell had a touchdown, Sullivan had a touchdown. This is a very interesting dynamic. Peekskill going on the road now after a huge victory last week. How do they handle it? I'm going to go with Peekskill. I think Peekskill wins this game. They've been very impressive defensively, which is an open thing to me. I think they have the skill guys to make plays on offense, but I've always wondered defensively how they'll handle it. They've been impressive last 2 weeks. I'm going to go with Peekskill. And Mars is also going to go with Peekskill, so we're both on the same page so far. Let's go to the next game. B matchup, Albertus Magnus 0-2 at Briarcliff Hamilton Football Program, who's 1-1. And Briarcliff Hamilton, I thought they had a really tough start the last game, but boy, the offensive and defensive line really stepped up. They were down 14-2, and then they just absolutely exploded. Kyle Vincent with a touchdown run, Sadaka with a touchdown run. I think you're going to see, if they could bottle that up and continue to improve in that facet, I think you're going to see this team continue to grow. And I'm going to go with Briarcliff Hamilton Football Program. At home, offensive and defensive line was very impressive last game that I watched them. I think it continues this week. Mars has also picked the Briarcliff Hamilton Football Program. Hudson Valley Football League matchup, Ramapo 0-2 at Poughkeepsie, who's 0-3. Both teams trying to get their first win of the year. When I look at Ramapo, turnovers have absolutely been killing this team the first 2 weeks of the season, but this is one of the fastest teams in the entire class. They have a lot of skill guys, a lot of speed. When you look at Poughkeepsie, the offense you can see is getting better with running back like Lee. Last week, the passing attack starting to get going. You can see the offense improving. My concern is defense for Poughkeepsie. I think Ramapo takes advantage if they could just limit the turnovers. I'm going to go with Ramapo to win this game on the road, and Mars has also picked Ramapo. Let's talk about a B matchup. Pearl River 1-1 at Hastings, who's 0-2. I tell you what, I'm not a big guy in moral victories, but Pearl River definitely showed me some stuff last week. They showed a lot of grit. They bring a lot of pressure defensively and generate a lot of negative plays. And can this offensive line continue to grow for Pearl River? Interesting, but they got their quarterback Whalen who makes plays. McLaughlin, who's a big-time two-way player for them. For Pearl River, who's also a dynamic player. Hastings, the defense has given up some big plays, some big chunk plays, which can cause some issues. Can they generate enough pressure from Pearl River and take advantage on the offensive line trying to continue to grow? Is going to be a huge factor to them. This offensive line for Hastings also has to really help this offense get back on track. So interested to see these two teams go at it. I'm going to go with Pearl River on the road. Mars is also going with Pearl River. Let's talk about another B matchup. Edgemont 0-1 at Croton Harmon, who's 1-1. Last time we saw Edgemont, the game had to end early because of injuries. It's always a concern with the smaller teams. How do they respond coming back, having a week off? Again, their starters, I think, are pretty strong. They have some pretty talented skill guys and some offensive linemen. So does Edgemont come back with a vengeance? But Croton Harmon, I'll tell you what, defense has been pretty strong so far this season. It's the offense. Can they get some consistency there? We know about Jacob Jones on defense side of the ball. Reed made some huge plays in their last game. They're on a very short week, so interested to see how Croton Harmon handles it. I am going to pick them at home, though. Croton Harmon wins this game. Mars has also picked Croton Harmon. Okay, let's go to the next B matchup. Rhinebeck 2-1 at Irvington, who's 0-2. Another league game, and when I look at Rhinebeck, there's one of those teams that also giving me crap that I didn't pick them previous week. but I give them a lot of kudos. Their quarterback Merkel was really good last week, multiple touchdowns, and then the previous week the defense was making some big-time plays, getting a shutout. So you saw a little bit the last 2 weeks, Reineck winning 2 straight, making some plays on defense, making some plays on offense. I think that's really good. 14 points allowed the last 2 weeks. Irvington, Chris Callahan is going to have to be huge for them, making some plays against this Reineck defense that has shown some really impressive, has played really strong the last couple weeks. And Mason Cann, I think, is their most dynamic player. At the running back spot, as a receiver, receiving touchdown. As a defensive back, had a pick 6. Interesting, Irvington back at home, but I tell you what, I really like the way Reineck is playing. I'm going to go with Reineck. These last couple of weeks have been really strong for them. Their quarterback, Merkel, is so important for this offense. When he gets going, this team is very different. Mars has also picked Reineck in this matchup. All right, let's go to the games that we broke down earlier. First one is that B matchup. Putt Valley 2-0 at Nanuet. It was 1-1. Such a huge game for Putt Valley. Can really make a statement in this one. Have to go on the road to Nanuet. That is coming off a major loss. And how do they respond? I think they respond well. I'm going to go with Nanuet. The grittiness, the toughness, this defense, I think, responds. I think they'll have an easier time running the ball. This is going to be such an important game for both teams to really send a message on who is kind of those upper echelon B teams. But I'm going to go with Nanuet at home. I think this is going to be a closer game than what some of the previous matchups have been. Mars has also picked Nanuet in this one. Dobbs Ferry 1-0 at Bronxville, who's 1-1. Dobbs Ferry ability to run the ball with some of their stout offensive linemen and this defensive secondary. Can they make some big plays? I think Bronxville is going to win this one at home. I think they get off to a faster start. They'll make enough plays defensively. Again, it's not going to be easy to stop the run against Dobbs Ferry, but I think they get a few possessions, they take advantage of it, they score some points, and Bronxville wins this. Mars has also picked Bronxville. Man, we are on the same page for all these games right now. Let's talk about another B matchup. Ardsley 2-0 at Byram Hills, who's 1-1. This is another interesting one. I think Byram Hills is another team you're going to see try to respond back at home. Ardsley coming off a huge victory. How do they continue the momentum? But I am going to go with Ardsley. I like Ardsley's ability to run the football. Byram Hills struggled defending the run last time, and I do think Byram Hills' offense will be much more active, much more efficient. But Ardsley, again, with that defensive front, generating some pressures, I do think Ardsley is going to win this one. And I do see Mars has also picked Ardsley. So, man, we are on the same mindset right now with all these picks. Let's go to one of the huge big games. Tuckahoe 2-0 at Haldane, who's also 2-0. And I tell you what, really big rivalry. Tuckahoe has really owned this series the last 5 matchups. There's been some really close ones, some really classic ones. And, again, I really like both these teams. I think these two D schools have really shown these last few weeks and now the last 2 years that they can compete with the C schools and they can win these games for the C schools. Now they play each other in a big rivalry. Haldane is at home. I'm going to go with the upset. I think Haldane pulls it off this year and, again, does not take anything away. But being at home, being beaten the last few times with the skill guys of Ryan Van Tassel and Evan Gianchinta, I think the offensive line holds up well enough. It's a very talented defensive front. It's going to be tough to stop this passing attack of Tuckahoe, but I do think they control the ball a little bit, running the football, keep some less possessions on the other end. And I'm going to go with Haldane. Now, Mars went with Tuckahoe, so we'll see. Now let's talk about the game of the week, guys. Rye 2-1 at Pleasantville, who is 2-0. Such an interesting game. Pleasantville has won, I think, 19 straight regular season games. Rye is the big dog coming down to B. Who wins this matchup? Daniel Picard, AJ Miller, some big heavyweights with different skill guys. I'm going to go with Rye. I'm going to go with Rye with the upset on the road. And the only reason I'm going to say is because Pleasantville is still figuring out things in the trenches. And I think Pleasantville is, again, a very good team. Definitely could see them winning a second time playing each other in a potential championship. This could be a showcase for that championship in the future. But I do like the way Rye is playing recently, being more balanced. And again, defensively, slowing down the rush attack. They're going to bring a lot of pressure, try to bottle up Daniel Picard as much as possible. I'm going to go with the Rye with the victory, and Mars does not have a pick for this one, obviously being part of the Pleasantville program. That's it, everyone. Thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate you guys. As always, this is Frank signing off. Peace out.